Sometimes it's fun to look back at NHL trades that came close but never happened. Of course, we know there were several teams in on the Jack Eichel sweepstakes before he ended up going to Vegas. Today we're going to look at the asking price from the Anaheim Ducks to acquire Eichel from the Sabres. We'll discuss this almost trade coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're going to do a little bit of a look back on the Jack Eichel sweepstakes. Of course, we know he ended up going to the Vegas Golden Knights, but the Jack Eichel sweepstakes really was drug on for a really long time. I know at some points in the channel, it felt like we were talking about him pretty much on a daily, weekly basis. It was, kind of got a little nauseating over time because the rumor mill was just churning with Eichel rumors after Eichel rumors after Eichel rumors. It was a lot of teams in the mix. As you can imagine, when a player of this magnitude is known to be looking for a trade or made available, pretty much the entire league, to at least some small degree, would be remotely interested, at least kick tires or inquire on the initial price. Of course, I don't think you really get down to being any more than maybe 6 to 8 teams that were semi-serious, and out of those 6 or 8 teams, I think it was probably down to about 3 or 4 that actually had serious conversations with the Sabres, and maybe even out of that 3 or 4, maybe down to 2 or 3 that actually had offers on the table, or at least received an offer, or an asking price, we should say, from the Buffalo Sabres. So, of course, we knew for the longest time that the rumored asking price for Eichel was 4 first-round quality assets. So it doesn't have to be 4 first-round picks, but it could be players that are first-round quality caliber, recently drafted, first-round talents, or a combination of that with 1 or 2 first-round picks, or something to that degree. Now, of course, he ended up going to Vegas, as we know, and here's a quick snapshot of the trade in case you don't recall. Going to the Buffalo Sabres was Peyton Krebs, a recently drafted first-round prospect who was, certainly projects to be a top 6 player. At this point, it's still a little early to say exactly what his ceiling is or where he is going to be long-term. Of course, they get Alex Tuch, who's a tremendous hockey player. Of course, being, from the Buffalo area made it very interesting and, intriguing for him to head home. He was quite happy to do so, even though a lot of NHL players might not have been thrilled with going to Buffalo because of the state of the franchise and going through a rebuild. Not something that a lot of players really look forward to per se. But in Tuch's case, it was something he was very much interested in growing up as Sabres fans. And he's a tremendous talent. He's fitted nicely there. He's a little bit older, though. He's not old by any means, but certainly, a player that was a little bit older than I think a lot of us expected to be included in the deal, but certainly a talented hockey player. And there's also 2 draft picks in here, but one was the conditional first-round pick in 2022, which is top 10 protected. So if for some reason Vegas falls down into the draft lottery, gets a top 10 pick, they can punt that to 2023. And there's also a 2023 second-round pick included. And if the condition on the first one kicks in and that first rounder goes to 2023, then the second rounder in 2023 gets bumped to 2024. So either way, they're getting a first and a second. It's just not completely clear yet on what the year is going to be, but right now looks like that top 10 protected won't come into play because Vegas is certainly trending to, at this point, have a good shot at getting into the playoffs. And even if they don't, I can't see a scenario where they're in the top 10. At least it's pretty unlikely, but we won't know for sure just yet. Either way, that's what they get. 2 picks, a first-round talented player like Krebs, and a really good hockey player in Alex Tuch, who's just a little bit more established and a little bit older and mature in his NHL career. Now, the rumored asking price for the Anaheim Ducks here is what we want to take a look at here today. Elliot Friedman recently talked about this on a recent podcast and a radio show, the Jeff Merrick Show, talking about the return package that the Sabres wanted from Anaheim. We know Anaheim was one of those teams right down in the mix. We heard a lot about the Bruins, the Flames, the Rangers, the Kings, the Ducks, a few others as well. Honestly, in my opinion, I think the Golden Knights, who I don't think were really mentioned a lot early on, kind of came in a little bit later, but then once they were known to be involved, were kind of considered a leader in a likely landing spot for quite some time before the trigger was pulled and everything came to be. The Ducks and the Kings were probably the 2 teams mentioned the most out the West, and then the Rangers to a degree, Boston, Calgary. I don't think Boston, Calgary were as serious because, to be completely honest, I just don't think they had the assets. I think they were very interested. I think that's fair, but I never really saw a scenario where they really had the necessary assets to really intrigue the Sabres in a trade. Unless the Calgary Flames were going to offer up like a Matthew Tkachuk, which I didn't see happening. It wasn't going to go there. Boston, I mean, that's a tough one as well, unless they're throwing in like Pasternak or something. You know, obviously he's, again, a little bit more mature, but so was Alex Tuch. They might have went for that. If the Bruins had, you know, like a comparable to a Krebs, like a really highly sought first rounder, like if they would have had, you know, Fabian Lysell, David Pasternak on a first rounder and second rounder, that might be interesting to them. But why would Boston do that? Just, to me, it didn't make sense. So those two teams, to me, just were not really serious, in my opinion. The Rangers, I think, were very serious. And to me, I think Chris Drury shied away from the asking price. I think they were very, very interested. From what I've been told personally, from a connection that I know that it's connected to the Rangers and what we've heard through all of the NHL insiders, I think the Rangers very much were in the mix, but just never quite near the finish line. Anaheim and LA, I think, were the closest outside of Vegas. Now, of course, we know that the Kings were rumored to be being pushed by the Sabres to include a guy like Quentin Byfield, and they weren't going to do that, and it just wasn't going to happen. But the asking price from the Anaheim Ducks, reportedly, according to Friedman, was Trevor Zegras, of course, who was a really skilled, very talented former first-round pick, high first-round pick, center iceman. And then, of course, Jamie Drysdale, another very highly sought-after former first-round pick, quality defenseman, projects to probably be a top-pair guy once he reaches his ceiling. And, at least two picks, likely being first, or them might have settled for a first and a second if Drysdale and Zegras were willing to be included here in the mix. That's an awfully steep price. If you look at the deal that Vegas ended up paying to get Eichel, that to me is a substantially higher price tag. I mean, if the picks, let's just say, are comparable, but right now with the situation in Anaheim, does Eichel make them a better team? Sure, he does. But does he have enough impact in year one for that draft pick would be much higher than the Vegas pick? At least it's quite likely that it could be. So it could be even more expensive from that standpoint. No offense to Peyton Krebs, but Drysdale and Zegras are certainly higher quality prospects. I like Peyton Krebs a lot, but I think the ceiling for both those guys are much higher. And of course, like I said, when it comes to Alex Tuch, you can make an argument that Zegras, for example, would be a lot more considered more expensive and a higher quality player because he's much younger, very skilled, and he's nowhere near his ceiling yet, whereas we kind of know what Alex Tuch is. And like I said, he's a very good player. I think he can make a good impact. He'll like being in Buffalo, be good for the locker room. There's lots to like, but I think any team would take Zegras any day of the week. I mean, that's just common sense. At least I think it is. So to me, Anaheim would have been foolish to make this trade, and it's probably wise that they did not. Of course, a lot of these negotiations would have taken place under former GM Bob Murray. Bob Murray, I'm not quite so sure if he was going in the same direction that we currently see with new GM Pat Verbeek. We know they're basically heading towards a rebuild after seeing a mass sell-off of pending UFAs. We know they traded Raquel, they traded Lindholm, they traded Manson, they traded Delorier. Getzlaf is retiring. That's 5 pretty significant veterans taken out of that lineup that won't be there next year, and the kids are going to be getting a much bigger role. But I mean, down the middle on the center ice position, they have Trevor Zegras, they have Mason McTavish, who they got in the 21 draft, who looks to be like a real solid stud centerman as well. He's a centerman who can play like a power forward. Zegras is more of the highly skilled guy. To me, they'll make a dynamic duo down the middle. It just didn't make sense to pull the trigger on that trade, in my opinion, for the Anaheim Ducks with with having Eichel there. Like he's good, and he's arguably can be a top 10 player, top 15 player in the league when he's healthy and everything. But the other reported thing here with this from Friedman is that the Ducks did have concerns over the procedure that Eichel wanted to have done for his disc replacement in his neck, that they weren't necessarily completely sold on that procedure, and it wasn't a given that if they made the trade that they were going to let Jack get the surgery he wanted. So it's hard to say how happy everybody would have been involved there. Of course, because that's not something you can really make a condition. I don't know that Anaheim would have pulled the trigger on it if knowing if, depending on how Eichel felt about that. I really don't know where things stood in that regard because that never was really discussed. But at the end of the day, they had concerns over the surgery. They had big concerns over the asking price, which certainly makes a lot of sense as to why they did not make the trade. It makes total sense. And if I'm Buffalo, I don't blame them for asking for the moon here from the Anaheim Ducks. Like I said, they were rumored to be looking for guys like Byfield and others from the LA Kings. They were rumored to be looking for like Lafreniere from the Rangers. Maybe Lafreniere, there was rumored about Kravtsov, maybe Nils Lundqvist, like some combination of a couple of those prospects in a first and a second or something like that. Like, it's not a wonder why these teams shied away. And at the end of the day, even though they still got their 4 assets, they, in my opinion, didn't get as solid of a deal as a lot of teams, probably thought they might based on what the asking price was early on. But it's no wonder why things drug on as long as they did here. Like I said, Peyton Krebs, certainly a really interesting prospect, which I think will have a big impact in Buffalo. But certainly I think lower rated than a lot of these other prospects that we're talking about here. When it comes to Drysdale, Zegras, Byfield, Lafreniere, he would be ranked lower than a lot of those players. Same with Alex Tuch being a little bit older. Vegas doesn't care so much about draft picks as some of these other teams because they're still in go-for-it mode. It's a different scenario, really. And we'll see. And Eichel's been good in Vegas, and if they can get in the playoffs, we'll just see how much impact it'll be. But long-term, I think he'll be a good fit there. They have lots to like about Vegas, but they also have a really tight salary cap, and it's really hard to say long-term how this works out. But those are your details from the Anaheim Ducks trade with the Sabres on the Eichel trade that never took place. He ends up going to Vegas instead. Obviously, the Sabres would have made out much better if one of these other teams would have pulled the trigger, but I don't blame them for doing so. Let me know what you think down below. Did the Sabres really get the best deal? Obviously, they hung on as long as they did, so you have to think they couldn't really wait any longer. And if this was the best that was going to be put on the table, they probably had to take it, but they might have out-negotiated themselves into not getting something better. But long-term, we'll have to wait and see just how good this package is because we don't know the ceiling yet of Peyton Krebs. We don't know what kind of players they're getting with these draft picks just yet either, so it's going to be a few years before we can truly evaluate the return offer coming from the Golden Knights. So let me know your thoughts on this, and we'll discuss further down in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We will normally keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.